The rain came hard that night, the kind that slicked the streets of Santa Rosa, until every traffic light shimmered across puddles like red and green glass. October 28, 2005. The vineyards outside town had already gone quiet for the season, and the smell of wet earth carried through the air. In the heart of town, the square was nearly empty except for the glow of one bookstore window, and the sound of tires hissing along 4th Street. Inside that bookstore, Megan Whitfield was closing up for the evening. She wasn't supposed to be working late. She'd stayed behind to help the owner restock a shipment that had arrived just before closing. At 28, Megan had a quiet grace to her, the kind of woman people described as steady, someone whose kindness was unassuming but constant. She taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary, volunteered at a literacy center twice a week, and still sent handwritten thank you notes to parents after school events. That night, she packed her things neatly into a canvas tote, slipped her raincoat on and waved goodnight to her boss. It was 8:47 p.m. when the store's bell jingled behind her. She pulled the hood up over her hair and jogged across the street toward her white Honda Civic parked under a dim streetlight. A security camera from a hardware store across the street caught her last known moments. A grainy image of a woman crossing the wet asphalt, head slightly lowered, purse against her side. Seconds later, headlights from another vehicle swept through the frame. Then the footage ended. When Megan didn't show up for school the next morning, her absence was noticed immediately. By 8:30 a.m., the principal was calling her cell phone. By noon, one of her co-workers drove by her duplex on Cleveland Avenue, where her car was missing and her porch light was still on. The voicemail box was full, the curtains drawn. Her parents, who lived in Petaluma, called police that afternoon. "This isn't like her," her mother told the dispatcher. "She's careful. She always lets someone know where she's going." By evening, officers from the Santa Rosa Police Department were canvassing the neighborhood. They found her car first, parked near the eastern edge of town, by a dirt turnout off Mark West Springs Road. The driver's door was unlocked. Inside, the keys were still in the ignition, her purse on the passenger seat, and an unopened bottle of water rolling in the footwell. There were faint drag marks in the mud near the front bumper, but the rain had washed most of it away. Detective Robert Lang, then 38, was assigned as lead investigator. "It looked like she never got the chance to fight," he would later recall. That first weekend, they searched every ravine, drainage ditch, and wooded trail within a 5-mile radius. Volunteers from the community turned out in dozens, passing out flyers printed on home computers, stapling them to telephone poles until the streets were lined with her smiling face. Missing Megan Whitfield, aged 28. By the 3rd day, hope began to feel fragile. Search dogs traced her scent from the car to the edge of a trail, but lost it near a patch of blackberry bushes. Detectives brought in cadaver dogs, divers, and helicopters equipped with thermal imaging. Nothing. Then, on November 2nd, a jogger in a wooded area off Calistoga Road spotted what looked like clothing tangled in brush. Officers arrived within the hour. They found her body partially covered with leaves, less than 2 miles from where her car had been discovered. The autopsy later confirmed what everyone had feared. She'd been assaulted and strangled. The investigation consumed the town. Local news crews camped outside the police station. The Press-Democrat ran front-page stories for weeks. Residents locked their doors at dusk, something few had done before. "It just didn't feel like Santa Rosa anymore," one neighbor said. Detectives collected every piece of physical evidence they could find. Fibers, hair, soil, fingerprints from the car door, even tiny skin fragments caught under Megan's nails. But in 2005, forensic science was still limited by technology. DNA testing existed, but the available samples were too degraded and mixed with environmental contamination. The partial profiles couldn't meet the FBI's standards for inclusion in CODIS. The case stalled. Leads came and went. A suspicious ex-boyfriend who had an alibi, a drifter seen near the highway, a delivery driver whose route passed the bookstore that night. None of it held. By early 2007, the investigation had officially gone cold. The evidence boxes were labeled and sealed, placed in the basement of the police department's old building on Sonoma Avenue. Megan's parents continued to call once a month, then once every few months. The detectives never stopped answering, even when they had nothing new to say. For the next decade, the town moved on outwardly, but traces of the case lingered like a scar. The bookstore changed ownership. Her classroom was renamed the Whitfield Learning Room, where new teachers kept a small framed photo of her on the bookshelf. Every October, her students, now adults, lit candles at the park across from Lincoln Elementary. Detective Lang stayed with the department, working homicides and missing persons. He kept Megan's file in his office cabinet, wedged between newer cases. "It was the one I couldn't shake," he later told a journalist. By 2015, forensic science had transformed. Rapid STR testing, improved extraction methods, and expanded CODIS databases were clearing cold cases nationwide. But Megan's evidence remained unsolved. The partial DNA profile was too incomplete for comparison, 4 markers short of the minimum threshold. In 2018, Lang joined the department's new cold case unit, a small team dedicated to revisiting older files with fresh eyes. The first case he pulled down was hers. The evidence envelopes were brittle with age. Inside one, a small envelope marked trace evidence, vehicle door handle. Inside it, a single swab. It had been tested before, twice, with inconclusive results. But a new private lab in California offered something different. Enhanced STR analysis capable of working with trace amounts down to 10 picograms. Lang requested retesting. It took months for approval and even longer for results. By early 2021, he got a call from the lab director. They'd recovered a usable profile, partial but strong enough for familial comparison. It was entered into the California Department of Justice database. No hits. Then in 2022, the sample was uploaded into a genealogical database through cooperation with state-authorized genetic investigators. Within weeks, a new lead appeared, a partial familial link to a man with ancestry in the North Bay region. The match traced through a distant cousin's profile uploaded, voluntarily during a family heritage search. Lang's pulse quickened. As he followed the tree, the name that emerged was one he recognized from the original 2005 file. Ryan Aldrich, a former mechanic who'd worked near the bookstore and had once been questioned but released for lack of evidence. At the time, his DNA hadn't been taken. He'd moved out of state in 2006. When Lang pulled Aldrich's old interview transcript, one detail stood out. The man had said he didn't know Megan personally, but records later showed he serviced her car twice that year. He'd even written his name on her invoice. Lang contacted the California Department of Justice. Investigators in Oregon, where Aldrich now lived, were asked to obtain a discarded item for comparison. Within months, they collected a coffee cup he'd thrown away outside a gas station. The sample went to the lab. On a Thursday morning in December 2022, the results came in. The DNA on the cup matched the profile recovered from Megan's car door. Probability of random match. 1 in 1.4 trillion. Lang stared at the report for nearly a minute before exhaling. 18 years of silence, broken by one swab and one trace of skin no bigger than a grain of dust. He drove straight to the district attorney's office, evidence binder in hand. The arrest warrant was signed before sundown. That night, news broke across Northern California. Cold case solved after 18 years. DNA leads to arrest. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the Whitfield family's phone rang with something other than condolence. Megan's mother answered quietly. "Is it really him?" she asked. Lang paused on the line. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It's him. We've got him." Outside, the streets of Santa Rosa were wet again, rain streaking down the same storefront windows that had once held her missing posters. In a town that had learned to live with unanswered questions, that night felt different, like the first real breath after years of holding it, and somewhere in the evidence room, beneath fluorescent lights and quiet hums of refrigeration units, a single box marked Whitfield. 2005 finally had a new tag attached, closed. When news of the arrest broke, it spread through Santa Rosa like a sudden wind after years of still air. The morning of December 9, 2022, the headlines hit every local outlet. 2005 Whitfield murder, DNA breakthrough leads to arrest. It felt surreal. For many residents, the case wasn't just a memory. It was part of the town's collective story, the shadow that never lifted. At Lincoln Elementary, teachers gathered in the hallway before classes began. The principal, now in her 60s, read the news aloud from her phone. A few of Megan's former students, now parents themselves, posted tributes online remembering the teacher who once stayed late to help them read. Detective Robert Lang didn't celebrate that morning. He drove to the precinct before dawn, the warrant paperwork still in his passenger seat. By 7:15 a.m., he was on a video call with the Oregon State Police. They'd arrested Ryan Aldrich at his home in Eugene without incident. He'd opened the door wearing a gray hoodie and looked confused when they said Santa Rosa Police Department. According to the arrest report, Aldrich's first words were, "This has to be some kind of mistake." He was 45 now, softer around the edges, divorced, working part-time at a small auto repair shop. No record since moving north. The neighbors described him as polite but private, one of those guys who keeps his blinds down. But his DNA said otherwise. Lang and another detective flew out the next day. They met Aldrich at the Lane County Jail for the first interview. The room was small, cold, its walls the color of paper ash. Aldrich sat across the table, hands clasped, a nervous habit of rubbing his thumb against his palm. Lang set a manila folder on the table, but didn't open it. He began calmly. "Ryan, we've been looking at this case a long time. You remember Megan Whitfield?" Aldrich nodded slowly. "The teacher, right?" "Yeah, that was awful. I remember the posters all over town." "You worked at Hanson Auto," Lang said. "She brought her car in twice." He hesitated. "Maybe, I don't remember her specifically." Lang leaned forward. "We have your DNA from her car, Ryan, from the door handle. It's a match. We also have new testing that puts you near the scene that night." For several seconds, Aldrich just stared. Then his expression shifted. Confusion, denial, and something else. A flicker of realization that the years had finally run out. "I don't know how that's possible," he said, shaking his head. "I didn't touch her car." Lang stayed silent. He opened the folder, sliding a single page across the table. The lab report with his name printed at the top. "This is science," he said quietly. "You can't wash this away." Aldrich's shoulders slumped. He didn't confess, but his body language spoke volumes. The interview ended within an hour. Back in California, word of the arrest reignited old emotions that had been dormant for almost 2 decades. Reporters lined the police station steps. Cameras caught the chief's brief statement. "Today we can confirm the arrest of Ryan Aldrich in connection with the 2005 murder of Megan Whitfield. This case represents the persistence of our investigators and the power of modern forensic science. To the Whitfield family, we never forgot." Megan's parents stood beside Lang at the press conference. Her mother's eyes were wet but steady. "We prayed this day would come," she said softly. "And we thank every person who refused to give up on her." The next phase was the extradition. Aldrich fought it briefly, then waived his right to contest. In January 2023, he was transported back to Sonoma County under heavy security. The court filings listed charges of first-degree murder, with special circumstances of kidnapping and sexual assault. Bail was denied. When he appeared for arraignment, the courtroom was packed. Former classmates of Megan's students, old colleagues, townspeople who hadn't seen each other in years. Aldrich stood at the defense table, expression unreadable. The clerk read the charges aloud. "How do you plead?" His voice barely carried. "Not guilty." The proceedings were slow. Prosecutors had one shot at justice after 18 years, and they built the case brick by brick. Evidence technicians re-examined every preserved item from 2005, tire tracks, fibers, phone records, the crime scene photos. Forensic analysts compared old prints using upgraded systems, finding partial matches they'd missed before. But the centerpiece was the DNA. The lab results were ironclad. Experts testified that the genetic material found on the driver's side door and a trace from beneath Megan's fingernails matched Aldrich's profile with a statistical certainty greater than 1 in a trillion. The defense argued contamination, claiming that his DNA could have transferred while working on her car during service appointments. But prosecutors countered with the positioning of the samples, one from inside the handle crevice, consistent with contact at the time of abduction, not maintenance. Meanwhile, the DA's office painted a picture of motive and opportunity. Aldrich had been working late shifts near downtown Santa Rosa. He lived alone, just miles from the wooded area where Megan's body was found. Records showed he left work early the night she vanished, and had no verified alibi for those missing hours. In March 2023, prosecutors released previously unseen evidence to the court. A fiber match between his old work jacket, collected during a 2006 interview and stored in evidence, and fibers recovered from Megan's raincoat. The color, weave, and synthetic pattern were identical. By the summer of 2023, the trial date was set. The courthouse in Santa Rosa prepared for the attention it hadn't seen since the early 2000s. Detective Lang, now grey at the temples and near retirement, spent long nights reviewing testimony outlines. "It wasn't about proving something to the world," he said later. "It was about giving her a voice again." The prosecution's opening statement was quiet but deliberate. For 18 years, this case waited for one truth, the district attorney told the jury. That truth was written in DNA, waiting for the day we could read it. They played the old security footage, the grainy clip of Megan crossing the wet street, the car headlights flashing across the frame. The courtroom fell silent. Even after all the years, that image still hurt to watch. Witness after witness took the stand. The jogger who'd found the body, the forensic analysts, Megan's former co-worker, and finally her mother. Her testimony lasted less than 10 minutes. "She was the light in our family," she said through tears. "When she died, everything dimmed. But I never stopped believing that someday someone would answer for what they did." When it was Aldrich's turn, he declined to testify. His attorneys stuck to their narrative. No confession, no eyewitness, just circumstantial evidence. But science had already done the talking. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. On August 4th, 2023, they returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. A murmur rippled through the room as the foreperson read the decision. Aldrich stared forward, unblinking, as if trying to detach himself from the weight of the words. Lang, seated near the front, closed his eyes. 18 years of files, late nights, and unanswered questions had just collapsed into that single moment. The sentencing came a month later. The courtroom was quieter this time. No cameras, no media frenzy. Just the Whitfield family, the detectives, and the man responsible for the pain they'd carried half their lives. When the judge read the sentence, life, without the possibility of parole, Megan's father placed a trembling hand on his wife's shoulder. "We can breathe now," he whispered. Lang would later say that what struck him most wasn't Aldrich's lack of remorse, but his emptiness. "He didn't look evil," he said. "He just looked like someone who never thought time would catch up to him." After the sentencing, the DA held a final briefing. "This case reminds us that justice doesn't vanish with time," she said. "It only waits for science and perseverance to meet." Outside the courthouse, rain started again, the same steady drizzle that had fallen the night Megan disappeared. The town seemed quieter, humbled by the reminder that even in peace evil had once moved through its streets. The Whitfield family declined interviews that day. They returned to their home in Petaluma and placed a fresh photograph of Megan on the mantel. A new frame, but the same picture from her teaching days. Later that week, they visited the park near Lincoln Elementary, where the community had gathered every year to light candles. This time there were no missing posters or pleas for help. Just quiet, and the faint glow of candles reflected in wet grass. Lang retired a few months later. On his last day, he walked down to the evidence room. The shelves were lined with hundreds of boxes, but one caught his eye, the one marked Whitfield MCO 2005. A red tag now read, "Case closed." He stood there for a while, running his fingers over the faded handwriting. "I wish she knew we didn't stop," he said softly. "I wish she knew we kept our word." That fall, the city of Santa Rosa announced that a section of the downtown park would be renamed the Megan Whitfield Memorial Garden, dedicated to victims of unsolved and later solved crimes. At the dedication ceremony, children placed wildflowers at the base of a small plaque, engraved with her name and the words, "Gone but not forgotten." Justice found, love never lost. As the crowd dispersed, an older woman approached Lang quietly. She had been one of Megan's students in 3rd grade. "I still remember her voice," she said. "She told me once that words have power." I think she was right. Lang nodded, looking toward the flowers swaying gently in the evening breeze. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the story of Megan Whitfield had an ending. Not a perfect one, but an honest one. And in a quiet corner of California, where rain still painted the roads silver, the memory of a teacher whose kindness had once filled a small classroom finally came to rest. The Santa Rosa Police Department's cold case office sat tucked behind an old brick facade. A quiet wing with flickering fluorescent lights and walls lined with boxes, marked in faded ink. Each one represented a life interrupted, a story without an ending. After the Whitfield case was finally closed, those rooms carried a different kind of energy, not relief exactly, but validation that time, when paired with science, could still tell the truth. The breakthrough that led to Ryan Aldrich's arrest had not come by chance. It was the result of a deliberate, methodical reevaluation that began in 2020 when Detective Robert Lang, now nearing retirement, was reassigned to a small team dedicated to revisiting unsolved cases from the late 90s and early 2000s. They called it Project Resolve. Every Thursday morning, Lang and 2 forensic analysts, Carla Moreno and Jeremy Holt, sat around a table reviewing evidence inventories. Most files were thin, victims' photos yellowing with age, lab reports typed on paper that smelled faintly of storage. When they reached the Whitfield file, Lang paused. The evidence log listed several items: a raincoat, a set of car keys, and 3 small plastic vials marked trace material, jacket lining. They'd been collected from the victim's clothing during the autopsy, stored in a temperature-controlled vault ever since. In 2005, those vials meant little. The DNA inside them was partial, degraded and useless for identification with the technology of that era. But in 2020, things had changed. California's Department of Justice had begun offering mitochondrial DNA testing for cold cases, capable of analyzing samples once considered hopeless. Lang looked at the list and tapped his pen against the paper. "We still have this, don't we?" he asked. Moreno nodded. "Yeah, it's in freezer storage. Never been retested." "Let's pull it," he said. A week later, the vials were shipped to a state forensic lab in Richmond. There, inside a sterile workspace humming with refrigeration units, a technician opened the sealed envelope for the first time in over 15 years. Inside were fine strands of hair clinging to fibers from Megan's coat. Under the microscope, they were nearly invisible, but the technician knew that even a single-cell nucleus could hold answers. Over the next 3 months, the lab used advanced extraction techniques to isolate mitochondrial DNA from one of the hair shafts. The sequence was then compared against a growing database of genetic profiles maintained by law enforcement. The results returned nothing conclusive. But that wasn't the end. In early 2022, the Santa Rosa team authorized a genealogical analysis, a process that allowed familial matching through open-source databases used by millions of Americans for ancestry research. It was controversial but legal under strict state protocols for violent crimes. The data was sent to Parabon Nanolabs, a company that had gained national attention for its role in solving numerous cold cases, including the Golden State Killer. Their analysts built a genetic family tree around the unknown suspect's DNA profile, tracing possible relatives across generations. It took weeks of cross-referencing census records, marriage certificates, and social media traces. Then one morning, a lead analyst named Sarah Nguyen found something. The suspect's profile shared significant genetic markers with a family in Oregon. From there, the search narrowed quickly. The branches of the family tree pointed to one name that fit geographically and age-wise: Ryan Aldrich. When Lang received the call, he was in his office drinking lukewarm coffee and reviewing another file. Nguyen's voice on the phone was calm but deliberate. "Detective, I think we found your guy." The next step was confirmation. Local investigators in Oregon discreetly obtained a discarded item from Aldrich, a coffee cup, collected from a trash bin outside the repair shop where he worked. The DNA on the rim was analyzed and matched the unknown sample from Megan Whitfield's jacket with complete precision. Lang later described that moment as both electrifying and devastating. "It was the hit we'd waited for," he said. But it also meant facing the reality of who did it. Someone who'd been right there the whole time, living his life like nothing happened. Forensic scientists across the state watched the case closely. It became a benchmark for the growing field of forensic genealogy, proof that even cases from the early 2000s could be resurrected through patience and preserved evidence. At a regional conference later that year, Moreno presented the case study. Her slides showed the progression: original sample degradation, mitochondrial sequencing, genealogical narrowing, and final confirmation. She ended her talk with a quiet statement that drew applause from the room. "We didn't invent justice," she said. "We just learned how to listen to what the evidence was saying all along." While the science carried the case, the human side never faded. The Whitfield family, who had lived through nearly 2 decades of uncertainty, found themselves pulled into a whirlwind of interviews, hearings, and procedural updates. For Megan's mother, the relief came mixed with exhaustion. "I don't hate him," she said softly during one conversation with a reporter, "but I hate that he took away all the years we could have had." Her father, once stoic, broke his silence after the verdict. "For years I'd see people in town who reminded me of him," he said. "Every mechanic, every face at a gas station. It eats at you. You start to imagine monsters everywhere. Now at least, the face has a name." The trial's forensic component would later be studied by criminal justice programs across California. Professors highlighted the Whitfield case as a model of how persistence and preservation intersect. Unlike many older cases, this one benefited from proper evidence handling back in 2005, a testament to the early investigators who carefully labeled and stored every item, unaware that future science would one day need it. After the verdict, Lang was invited to speak at the State Academy in Sacramento. Standing in front of a room full of young detectives, he held up a photograph of Megan Whitfield, the same one used on the original missing posters. "This is why you take care of every file, every fiber, every forgotten piece," he told them. "Because someday someone like her will be waiting on you to open that box." The impact rippled beyond Santa Rosa. Other cold case units across the country reached out, asking about the process, the costs, the ethical considerations. Some